He signed his name on a line he never read. 3 weeks later, a lawyer knocked on his door and said, "Sir, do you know what you actually agreed to?" That's when Earl Whitfield realized the pipeline wasn't just crossing his land. It was about to take his life apart piece by piece. My name is not important. What happened on Earl Whitfield's 90 acres in the fall of that year, that's the part you need to hear. Because somewhere out there right now, someone else is about to make the same mistake Earl almost made. And maybe, just maybe, this story stops them in time. Earl was 71 years old. He'd farmed that land since he was 19, back when his father handed him the keys to an old Ford truck and said, "Son, the dirt doesn't lie to you. People do." Earl never forgot that. He planted corn in the spring, soybeans in rotation, and every October he'd stand at the edge of his east field and watch the sun drop behind the tree line like it did every single year of his life. 90 acres. Not a big farm by anyone's standard. But it was his, paid off, free and clear. His late wife, Dorothy, was buried under the oak tree near the northern fence line, and every morning Earl walked out there with his coffee before the sun came up, just to say good morning to her. That land wasn't dirt to Earl, it was memory. It was blood. It was the only proof left that his life had meant something. So, when a black SUV rolled up his gravel driveway on a Tuesday morning in September, dust kicking up behind it like a warning, Earl had no idea his whole world was about to tilt sideways. The man who stepped out wore a crisp white shirt, no tie, sleeves rolled up just enough to look approachable, but not enough to look like he'd ever actually worked outside a day in his life. He introduced himself as Grant Holloway, senior right-of-way engineer for a company called Meridian Transline Energy. He had a folder tucked under his arm and a smile that Earl would later describe as the kind of smile a man wears when he already knows how the story ends. "Mr. Whitfield," Grant said, extending a hand. "I'll get right to it.
My company is building a new natural gas pipeline, connecting a processing facility outside Danville with an interstate line farther north.
Our surveys show the most direct, most efficient route runs straight through your property. About 1.5 miles of trench, 40 feet wide, right through your east and center fields." Earl didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the man's shiny shoes, still spotless despite standing on a gravel driveway, and thought to himself, this man has never once gotten his boots dirty in his life. "That's so," Earl finally said. "Yes, sir. And I want you to know, we're not here to take anything from you. We're here to partner with you. This is a real opportunity. We're offering landowners along this corridor a one-time payment for the easement, plus a very fair rate per rod for the pipeline right-of-way." Grant opened his folder and slid a few papers across the hood of Earl's truck. "It's all right here." Straightforward as can be, Earl squinted at the papers. Small print, dense paragraphs. Words like perpetual easement, and successors and assigns, and ingress and egress rights, swimming across the page like a school of fish he couldn't quite catch. "Perpetual," Earl said slowly, testing the word in his mouth like it tasted wrong. "That means forever, don't it?" Grant's smile flickered just for half a second. "It means the agreement stays in effect for the duration of the pipeline's operational life, yes. But Mr. Whitfield, that's standard across the entire industry. Every one of your neighbors has already signed. The Pattersons signed last week. The Coles signed the week before that. That was the first lie." Earl didn't know it yet, but it was the first one. "I'll need to look this over," Earl said, folding the papers and tucking them under his arm. "Of course," Grant said, though something behind his eyes tightened just slightly. "But Mr. Whitfield, I do want to mention, we're on a tight construction schedule. The company's offering an early signing bonus of an additional $4,000 if we can get this finalized by the end of the week. After that, the bonus goes away. And frankly, the route planning moves forward regardless of your decision. Eminent domain gives us certain rights here. Given this is classified as a public utility corridor, I'd hate for you to miss out on the bonus for something that's likely to happen either way." There it was. The second lie, wrapped so neatly inside a truth that it almost sounded like kindness. Because yes, some pipeline projects did carry limited eminent domain authority, but not this one, not yet. Not without a certificate. Grant's own company hadn't even filed for. Earl didn't know that. Not yet. What Earl did know was the feeling crawling up the back of his neck. The same feeling he used to get right before a summer storm rolled in, when the air went still and heavy, and the birds went quiet all at once. He'd learned a long time ago to trust that feeling. "I'll think on it," Earl said again, firmer this time. Grant nodded, professional as ever, and handed him a business card. "Take your time, Mr. Whitfield, but not too much time." He smiled that same smile. "Opportunities like this don't wait forever." The SUV rolled back down the driveway, and Earl stood there for a long moment, watching the dust settle. The papers heavy in his hand like they weighed more than paper should. He didn't go inside right away. Instead, he walked out past the tool shed to the old barn at the edge of the yard, the one his father built board by board back in 1962, the one that still smelled like diesel and hay and 40 years of hard, honest work. That barn had always been Earl's thinking place. Whenever something sat wrong in his chest, he'd end up out there, sitting on an overturned bucket next to his workbench, running his thumb along the edge of some old tool his father used to hold. Like the wood and the steel still had answers in them if he listened close enough. He set the contract down on the workbench under the bare hanging bulb and spread it flat with both hands, the way he'd flatten a stubborn hide before stretching it. He was a farmer, not a lawyer. He'd built barns with his hands, fixed engines with nothing but a wrench and stubbornness, raised 2 kids who barely called anymore. But contracts were a different kind of animal. And something about this one felt like it had teeth hidden under its smile. The tractor sat quiet in the far corner, engine cold, and somewhere up in the rafters, a barn swallow shifted and resettled for the night. Earl read the same paragraph 4 times and understood it a little less each time. He almost signed it right then, right there on that workbench, pen uncapped, the bulb overhead buzzing faintly against the evening quiet. $4,000 was $4,000, and the county co-op had been raising fertilizer prices every season for the last 3 years. His knees ached worse every winter. Part of him, a tired, aching 71-year-old part of him, wanted to just sign the thing and be done with it. But then he thought about Dorothy under that oak tree, and he thought about his father's voice, all those decades ago, echoing off the same barn walls that surrounded him now. The dirt doesn't lie to you. People do. Earl set the pen down on the workbench, right next to the old handplane his father used to swear by, and for a long moment he just sat there in the quiet, listening to the wind move through the loose tin on the roof. The next morning, instead of driving into town for feed like he usually did on Wednesdays, Earl drove 22 miles to the county courthouse, and then another 11 miles to a small brick office above a hardware store, where a woman named Renata Castellanos ran a one-person law practice that specialized in exactly one thing: land and mineral rights disputes for farmers who didn't know they needed a lawyer until it was almost too late. Renata was maybe 45, sharp-eyed, with reading glasses pushed up into curly grey-streaked hair, and a stack of case files that looked like they hadn't seen daylight in weeks. When Earl laid the contract on her desk and told her the whole story, the SUV, the shiny shoes, the $4,000 bonus, the mention of eminent domain, she read the first 2 pages in complete silence. Then she looked up at him, and her expression had changed entirely. "Mr. Whitfield," she said slowly, "did this man tell you your neighbors had already signed this exact agreement?" "He did," Earl said. Renata leaned back in her chair, took off her glasses, and rubbed the bridge of her nose like she was bracing herself for something. "Mr. Whitfield," she said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is going to make you very, very angry." And that single sentence was the moment everything changed. Renata slid a folder across her desk, thick with printouts, county records, and a map, with red circles drawn around parcels of land that stretched across 3 counties. "This isn't the first time I've seen this contract," she said. "This isn't even the 10th time." Earl felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Mr. Whitfield, that Meridian Transline Energy has been running this exact playbook across this entire corridor for the past 8 months. Same engineer, sometimes different names on the business card, same script, same false urgency, same claim about eminent domain that, as of this morning, is legally false. Because Meridian Transline hasn't filed for a certificate of public convenience with the State Utility Commission. Without that certificate, they have no eminent domain authority whatsoever. None. They cannot take an inch of your land against your will. Not right now. Maybe not ever if the certificate gets denied, which, given the environmental review flags I'm seeing here, is entirely possible." Earl sat very still. "He said the Pattersons already signed." Renata pulled a sheet from her folder. "The Pattersons did sign something, but not this. They signed a survey access agreement, a much narrower document, that only allows the company to walk the land and take measurements. It does not grant a permanent easement. It does not authorize construction. Mr. Halloway either lied to you outright, or he's counting on you never checking. Given the pattern I'm seeing across these filings, Mr. Whitfield, I'd bet everything I own it's the former. Earl's jaw tightened, 71 years old, and he suddenly felt like a young man again, the kind of hot, clean anger he hadn't felt since he was in his 30s, watching a grain buyer try to shortchange him on a scale reading. Some things didn't change with age. They just got quieter, waiting for the right moment to come back out. "There's more," Renata said, and her voice dropped. Careful now, the way a doctor's voice drops right before delivering news nobody wants. Look at Section 14, subsection C, the perpetual easement language. This isn't just granting them the right to lay pipe. It's granting them a permanent 40-foot corridor with unrestricted future access, meaning they can come back in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, and add a second pipeline, a third pipeline, access roads, compression stations, whatever they decide they need, without ever asking you again, and without paying you another dollar beyond this one lump sum. And, Mr. Whitfield, she tapped the page, this corridor cuts directly through your center field. Do you know what's under your center field? Earl's stomach dropped. The old well, he said quietly. Dorothy's well, the one my granddad dug by hand in 1958. That well sits almost exactly on this proposed route, Renata said. And under this contract, if it needs to be capped, relocated, or destroyed during construction, the company has zero obligation to notify you in advance. Section 22, right here. Earl stared at the paper like it had grown teeth. For a long moment, neither of them said anything. Outside the window, a delivery truck rumbled past on the street below, and somewhere a dog was barking and the whole ordinary world just kept moving like nothing had happened. But inside that little office, something in Earl had gone very quiet and very hard, like a stone settling to the bottom of a lake.
Tell me what we do next.
We fight.
It was the smile of someone who had been waiting a long time for a client with enough backbone to actually fight back. First, she said, you do not sign anything. Not this week, not with a bonus attached, not ever under pressure. Second, we file a formal information request with the State Utility Commission to confirm, on the record, that Meridian Transline has no eminent domain authority over your property. Third, and this is the part I think you're going to enjoy, Mr. Whitfield, as we go public. There's a landowner coalition forming 2 counties over. 14 families so far, all of them approached with some version of this exact contract. All of them told lies about deadlines and neighbors who'd already signed. A few of them already lawyered up. If you're willing, your case, the well, the false urgency, the fabricated eminent domain claim, that's exactly the kind of documented pattern that gets a company like this in front of the Utility Commission with its story falling apart in real time. Earl thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. Then he thought about Dorothy under the oak tree, and his father's voice, and the shiny shoes standing on his gravel driveway like they owned the ground beneath them.
I've made my decision. We fight.
Good. Let's begin.
Over the following weeks, Earl found himself doing things he never imagined a 71-year-old farmer would do. He sat in the back room of a Grange Hall 2 counties over, listening to a retired schoolteacher named Vera Coombs describe how the same white-shirted engineer had told her that her neighbors had already signed. Word for word, almost the exact same sentence he'd used on Earl. He sat across a kitchen table that wasn't his own, the Pattersons' table, as it turned out, with a pot of coffee going cold between them, and realized the Pattersons had never actually signed the easement at all, only the narrow survey document Renata had described. He drove out to a gravel turnout along the county road with 3 other landowners, just to compare notes and dates and business cards, all of them printed from the same template, all of them carrying Grant Halloway's name or one of 2 others working the same territory. Piece by piece, the picture came together, and it was worse than Earl had first imagined. 14 families became 19, 19 became 26. One evening at the Grange Hall, an old dairy farmer named Silas Redmond stood up in front of the room with his cap twisted in both hands and admitted something none of them had expected. I already signed, he said, and the room went quiet. 2 months back. Same fella, same folder, same story about the neighbors already agreeing. I've got a granddaughter starting nursing school, and that $4,000 looked like the answer to a prayer I'd been praying for a year. He looked around the room, ashamed, like a man confessing a sin at church. I didn't think there was anybody to ask. Didn't think there was time. Renata stood up beside him, gentle now, the sharpness gone out of her voice. Mr. Redmond, a contract signed under fraudulent inducement isn't the end of the road. If the company misrepresented material facts to get your signature, and everything you've just described tells me they did, that contract can be challenged and potentially voided. You are not alone in this, and you are not the only one who trusted a man who didn't deserve it. That night, 3 more families came forward who'd already signed. By the time Renata filed the information request with the State Utility Commission, and then the formal complaint 3 weeks after that, the coalition wasn't just people who'd said no. It was people trying to undo a yes they'd been tricked into giving. The complaint cited false representations of eminent domain authority, fabricated claims about neighboring signatures, a pattern of high-pressure tactics designed to rush elderly and rural landowners into signing away permanent rights before they had time to consult counsel. And, for Silas Redmond and the others like him, fraudulent inducement claims aimed at unwinding contracts already signed. The complaint made the front page of the regional paper. Then it made the 6 o'clock news out of the capital. A reporter drove out to Earl's farm and stood at the edge of his east field with a microphone, asking him how it felt to stand up to a company with lawyers and lobbyists and more money than Earl would see in 10 lifetimes. Earl just looked into the camera and said, "It felt like doing what my father would have done." 3 weeks after that interview aired, Grant Holloway's SUV rolled back up Earl's driveway. Same white shirt, same folder, but this time, the smile faltered the second he saw who was standing on the porch beside Earl. Renata, arms crossed. The manila envelope in her hand thick enough to make Grant's easy confidence crack right down the middle. "Mr. Whitfield," Grant started. "I wanted to follow up on our—" "Mr. Holloway," Renata interrupted. "Calm as still water. Before you say anything else, I want you to know this conversation is being recorded, and I want you to know that we've already filed a formal complaint with the State Utility Commission regarding false representations of eminent domain authority made on this property on September the 9th. We also have signed statements from the Pattersons, the Coles, and 23 other families confirming they were told the same false claims you told Mr. Whitfield. Your company hasn't filed for a certificate of public convenience. You have no legal authority to threaten this man with a taking. And Mr. Whitfield will not be signing your contract. Not any version, unless it's rewritten from scratch with proper compensation, notification protocols for the water well on this property, and a hard limit on future expansion rights." Grant Holloway stood there in the driveway, folder hanging loose in his hand, and for the first time since he'd first pulled up on that gravel road, he had absolutely nothing to say. "You can tell your company," Earl said, stepping forward, voice steady as bedrock, "that this land has been in my family for 3 generations, and it isn't going anywhere unless I say so, on my terms at my price, with my lawyer's name on every single page. And you can also tell them that 26 other families in this region feel exactly the same way. So you might want to start planning a new route, because this one's closed." Grant didn't say a word. He got back in his SUV, and this time, when the dust kicked up behind him rolling back down the driveway, it felt different. It didn't feel like a warning anymore. It felt like a retreat. 6 months later, Meridian Transline Energy's application for a certificate of public convenience was denied by the State Utility Commission, citing, among other things, documented patterns of misrepresentation to landowners regarding regulatory authority. The company quietly redrew its pipeline route 60 miles east, avoiding the entire county. 2 of its senior right-of-way engineers, Grant Holloway among them, were no longer listed anywhere on the company's public filings by the following spring. Silas Redmond's contract was voided in a settlement 3 months after the complaint was filed. He got his signing payment back to the company, along with a formal apology letter he keeps folded in his Bible, and his granddaughter started nursing school that fall anyway. Paid for the old-fashioned way, a loan from the credit union and a lot of overtime on the dairy line. Earl drove out to shake his hand the day the settlement came through. Neither man said much. They didn't have to. Earl Whitfield still walks out to the oak tree every morning with his coffee before sunrise, same as always, rain or shine. The old well his granddad dug by hand in 1958 still runs clean and cold. The barn still smells like diesel and hay, and the workbench where Earl once sat turning a contract over and over under a bare bulb now holds nothing more troubling than a coffee can full of loose bolts and an old radio that only picks up the farm report. And every fall when the sun drops behind the tree line the exact same way it has for 52 years, Earl stands at the edge of his east field and thinks about how close he came to signing his whole life away on a line he never should have trusted. He didn't lose his land, but it wasn't luck that saved him. It wasn't the $4,000 he turned down, and it wasn't some stroke of good fortune that happened to fall his way while other families weren't so lucky. It was a choice, made alone in a quiet barn on an ordinary Tuesday night, when nobody was watching, and nobody would have blamed him for signing. It was one simple decision, the decision to slow down, to ask questions, to say, "I'll think on it," when every instinct in his tired, aching body wanted to just sign the paper and make the pressure go away. It was a barn workbench and a quiet evening spent turning over a stranger's promise until the wood grain underneath it started to show through. These days, Earl keeps a folder of his own in the top drawer of that same barn workbench. Not a contract, but copies of the complaint, the commission's ruling, and a handwritten list of every family who came forward. Every so often a stranger's truck pulls up his gravel driveway. Someone from 3 farms over who heard the story secondhand and wants to know how Earl really did it. Whether the whole thing is as complicated as it sounds, Earl always walks them out to the barn, sets the folder on the workbench under that same bare bulb, and tells them the same thing his father told him: the dirt doesn't lie to you. Then he tells them the rest in his own words, the way only a man who lived it can. If there's one thing Earl tells anyone who'll listen now, it's this: the moment someone hands you a contract and tells you there's no time to read it carefully, that is exactly the moment you need to read it most carefully of all. A rushed signature has never once saved anybody's land. It has only ever cost people theirs, because the dirt doesn't lie to you, but people do.